partial shutdown hits DHS. What to know about negotiations, potential impacts. Trump said he will be involved in the DHS funding negotiations. A partial government shutdown is in effect for the Department of Homeland Security, where funding ran out at the end of day Friday as lawmakers remain at an impasse over immigration enforcement. Earlier Friday, Director of the Office of Management and Budget Russell Vought directed DHS to begin implementing its shutdown plans. Members of Congress have left Washington for a week-long recess or to head overseas to Munich for a security conference. It's the third time since October that the federal government has experienced a lapse in funding. A record 43-day shutdown last fall, the longest in U.S. history, heavily disrupted agencies and impacted millions of Americans. A partial government shutdown ensued for several days between the end of January and early February that temporarily affected funding for the Defense, Education, Treasury, Labor, and State Departments. Now, caught in a funding fight are key areas of DHS: the Transportation Security Administration (TSA), the Federal Emergency Management Agency (FEMA), the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency (CISA), the U.S. Secret Service, and the U.S. Coast Guard as Democrats demand reforms to Immigration and Customs Enforcement (ICE). Officials from those agencies warned lawmakers that the lapse in funding will leave thousands of personnel working without pay, disrupt disaster reimbursements, delay cyber protections, and more. ICE, meanwhile, will largely continue operating because of $75 billion infusion provided in President Donald Trump's so-called One Big Beautiful Bill that was passed by Congress last summer. Democrats are calling for judicial warrants before agents can enter private property, a ban on ICE agents wearing face masks, requiring the use of body cameras, and new laws for user standards. President Trump on Friday told ABC News chief White House correspondent Mary Bruce he will be personally involved in the DHS funding negotiations. "I will. But you have to remember, if you look at Homeland Security, if you look at what they've done, if you look at what ICE has done, and Border Patrol, we have the safest border in the history of our country," Trump said. When asked how long he's preparing to let this funding battle play out or if he's willing to make any concessions, Trump said that he wants to protect law enforcement and is always in favor of them. The White House and Democrats have been sending proposals for ICE reforms back and forth. House Democratic Leader Hakeem Jeffries called the latest White House proposal, the details of which have not been released publicly, unserious. Democrats are expecting to make a counterproposal this weekend. Jeffries told ABC News on Friday the shutdown is a confrontation on behalf of the American people as Democrats dig in on making changes to immigration enforcement. "The reason why we have to have this confrontation on behalf of the American people is because in a spending bill, we have the ability to legislate dramatic change. That's what we're doing," Jeffries said. "Every single change needs to be ironclad and part of the law," he added. Overall, more than 90 of the Department of Homeland Security's 272,000 employees would continue to work during a shutdown, according to the agency's September shutdown plan, though many without pay. Officials from several DHS agencies testified before a House Appropriations subcommittee earlier this week on how they would be impacted by a shutdown. A majority of TSA employees will still be required to show up for work, as around 95 of TSA employees are deemed essential. Many, however, would work without pay. Acting Administrator Ha Nguyen McNeill said putting those workers through another shutdown would be unconscionable. 12 weeks later, some are just recovering from the financial impact of the 43-day shutdown. Many are still reeling from it. "We cannot put them through another such experience," McNeill told lawmakers on Wednesday. FEMA Gregg Phillips, Associate Administrator of FEMA's Office of Response and Recovery, said emergency response operations would continue and that the Disaster Relief Fund currently has sufficient resources for near-term response. Although he did warn that a catastrophic event would quickly strain available funding. CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, faced one of the biggest hits within DHS in the 2025 shutdown, with 65 of the division placed on furlough. When the government shuts down, cyber threats do not, and our adversaries work 247, warned Dr. Madhu Go, the acting director. Coast Guard pay would be halted for 56,000 active duty, reserve and civilian personnel, but they would still be required to show up for work. Vice Admiral Thomas Allen warned a lapse in appropriations requires the Coast Guard to suspend all missions except those for national security or the protection of life and property. He said a lack of funding has severe and lasting challenges for their workforce, operational readiness, and long-term capabilities. Secret Service Deputy Director Matthew Quinn said protective and investigative missions would continue, as 94% of Secret Service workforce is considered mission critical. There is no pause button on our mission. Paychecks may stop, but the work will continue, Quinn said. Though he warned of long-term consequences, especially for needed reform. The impacts.